Today I'm joined by Kat Grant, who, among many other things, wrote an article for the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Free Thought Now forum, which apparently was the cause of the Jerry Coyne incident that we've been discussing this week. First things first, Kat, you wrote your article back in November that Jerry claims his post was in response to. Could you summarize what your article was about?
Yes. So for reference, I am a contributing writer for Free Thought Now. So I write for the blog twice weekly. I'm not a guest writer as Jerry Coyne was. This is something I do very regularly and something I had been doing back when I was an attorney, also working for the Freedom for Religion Foundation. But basically, back in November, I put out a blog that was just kind of poking fun and also explaining the problem with this whole what is a woman, define a woman debate. I minored in classics, so I used the classic Diogenes, hold up a plucked chicken and say, behold a man story. And I go in and I start talking about how really trying to define womanhood on any number of terms, but especially on biological terms, is a quote unquote biological, at least, is always going to exclude someone you're not intending to exclude or include someone you are not intending to include. And going through and talking about gender and why, these questions matter, where they come from, the fact that gender categories themselves, especially in the Western world and in the United States, are based in white Christian colonialism. I go into some of the history there. I quote Marquette, one of the Catholic French explorers, and his experience with indigenous communities and gender. And I talk a little bit about how, all of these problems of defining what is a woman and protecting women's spaces, it's a non-problem. People are looking for problems that don't exist. There are already structures in place for the case of women's sports. And I also go through and debunk the bathroom predator myth and, the idea that trans women are just out here trying to sexually assault people. And this made Jerry Coyne and some other members of FFRF's honorary board, which an honorary board does nothing. An honorary board it is a title you get because your name is helpful to bring awareness to the organization. He was made an honorary board member forever ago. As co-president Andy Laurie described it to me, it was when he was still mostly just blogging about his cat. But this made him and a couple of other honorary board members very upset. They felt that I was flouting biology and flouting science, and they wanted an opportunity to rebut it and to respond. This is not the first time they have taken issue with my work. So that happened. And then we all kind of thought, I was not made aware of this until right before Christmas, right before it was published. But the general idea is everyone kind of thought maybe they just forgot about it. And then they came back with it the week of Christmas. And then everything kind of hit the fan on the 26th.
Yeah, that was interesting timing, to say the least. So why do you think Jerry targeted that specific post? Because it's not particularly inflammatory, especially compared to your other work, is it?
I won't say I didn't think it was inflammatory, because I knew it was going to upset some people. All of my work upsets people, but I knew diving into the what is a woman argument was going to upset some people. And I knew, as I mentioned earlier, every time I write something, basically, Jerry Coyne goes on his blog, which I should point out, he has his own blog. He did not need FFRF's forum. He has his own blog that he could have written this on, as he has continued to write on throughout this process. But I really think it is just he, alongside Richard Dawkins and a few other people, because they are trying to maintain relevance in a world that philosophically has moved past their particular brand of atheism, they've jumped onto the anti-trans grift. And I think he saw, oh, I'm a biologist, I can talk about biology. And he then proceeded to write this bizarre blog. Like, I know it's somewhere on the Internet Archive now, even though it's been deleted. It is truly astoundingly, if it weren't for how dangerous the rhetoric in it is, it would be almost comedic. Like, if this were a high school level paper, it would get a C plus at best, because I don't think I saw any spelling errors. I
I don't
think
know if
this,
I'd rank it that high. I mean, the substituting assertions for arguments thing is bad enough. The manipulating data is bad enough, but deliberately altering quotes, thinking no one would check, that's
yes,
not good, not good,
yes.
professor.
Like, even before we get into the data and all of that nonsense, he fully used the straw man fallacy, which this is a case study in why we need to make STEM majors take humanities classes and take rhetoric classes, because he fully strawmanned his way through the argument. My personal takes on sex and the idea of changing one's sex and how we define sex are incredibly complicated. And also, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not out here publishing my takes on sex. I never wrote about sex. The most I wrote about sex is just that intersex people exist and complicate the idea of trying to define gender on the basis of sex. So first of all, he starts on the premise that I was saying that trans people regularly get sex changes. There's this one weird moment in his blog where he goes like, and Grant, says, I regularly play with gender identity from day to day, hour to hour, which I do. But that doesn't mean that, they're having a sex change every hour. And I was like, well, that's because I did not say that. So it was truly just this unhinged old man yells at cloud in the most dangerous way possible, eventually. Straw man argument, terrible use of bad data that had no context to it. And it was so poorly constructed. I was baffled when I saw it. I did not read it before it went out. I was just told it was happening. So when I saw it in my email inbox, I was like, what on earth? Because I was expecting the usual turf nonsense. He has been yelling about turf stuff for a minute, but it went beyond that, especially with the use of data.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So the next thing I was going to ask you is if you got a chance to see it beforehand and offer feedback. I
No,
do.
it was a little bit my own fault. I probably could have asked for it. I think that I would have been allowed to at least take a look at it. That being said, I do think in some ways the fact that I did not offer feedback was somehow helpful, in the sense that he could not claim that there was one specific trans person censoring him, that he could not claim that in the process of this, that they FFRF was trying to, like, I don't know, play to the whims of, this one specific writer, because there is a correlation between when I came on staff and the uptick in LGBT related writing, because that is my area of expertise. So, in a way, I think it was a good thing that I didn't look at it, but also I do regret not taking a look, so that I could have more loudly opposed it getting put up. I was operating on the sense of the editorial staff, and Annie Laurie especially, know my opposition to platforming Coin, Dawkins, and co. because of their transphobic takes, and especially on letting them weigh in on trans issues. And so I kind of felt like if I had pushed back, I wouldn't have done much, but I do regret not reading it in advance, just so that I could have been a little bit more aggressive with my, I think this is a bad and dangerous idea, because I did not know that he was going to be going full trans women are predators.
It was pretty
That part
wild.
I did not know.
Yeah, it kind of took me aback when I went through the data. I'm like, not only is that bad data, but he's manipulated it. If if that were even in the ballpark of correct, that would mean trans women are the most dangerous and violent people in human history by
Right.
far.
Right. And it just, this is a pattern I notice with a lot of statistics revolving around trans people generally, but especially trans women. A lot of people just look at pure numbers. They don't look at the actual context. They don't look at what was actually being studied. They don't look at even sample sizes a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
But this also kind of reminds me of this whole infamous Swedish study that keeps getting thrown around to oppose gender affirming care, where they're like, it didn't reduce suicide rates. And it's like, that study didn't address suicidality at all. It looked at all cause mortality rates in the middle of the AIDS crisis. Like, gee, I wonder why there might have been a high rate of death for trans people during this like 30-year time period. Not to mention issues like being unhoused, sexual assault, physical assault. Trans people are still just getting full out murdered in the streets. There are all of these different factors in play. And even if suicidality specifically had still been studied, you would still have to take into account all of the other social factors that lead to death by suicide. So there's this real lack of statistics education on some people's part, and then a lot of people, such as Jerry Coyne and others, who seem to be taking advantage of that lack of statistics education in order to whip up fear, in order to demonize certain groups. And right now, that group is trans people.
Yeah, it's so wild seeing somebody like Jerry Coyne, who made his career on pushing back against creationist pseudoscience, now turning around and using the same techniques and arguments against human rights.
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
I saw someone describe the Jerry Coyne of it all as, over the past several years, uh, Jerry Coyne getting loved bombed by the conservative right and him eating it up and completely buying into it and feeling that he can do no wrong and that he is the antithesis of intelligence and knows everything about everything because he has a PhD in biology. And you're seeing this also with, I saw some of Dawkins' statements when Dawkins resigned from the board, of basically being like, they're rejecting science because they're not listening to this one biologist. Never mind the fact that he has no specialty in gender or sex, or I think one of his areas of expertise is fruit flies. I'm not even sure
Yeah,
if,
Coyne is an environmental biologist. He
yeah,
doesn't even specialize in, particular species anatomy. It's more ecosystems.
yeah. So, it feels very Dunning-Kruger in all of it. It very much feels like the Dunning-Kruger effect, the idea that the more you know about, a certain area, it's like there's this dip of like, I know nothing, I know more. And then it's like truly, very little, but you think you know everything. And that can happen a lot with people with a lot of expertise in one area. They then think that
Mm-hmm.
that expertise translates to another area. And we have seen Dawkins and Pinker, who also resigned from the board. It's kind of this trio of them. They are pulling this Coyne as a biologist and shouldn't have been censored for defending biology.
If
That
only
has
he'd
been
cited any biology instead of
right,
quoting from fucking Matt Walsh.
right.
No, it's so wild. So suffice it to say, do you think that he addressed your points fairly in his piece?
No, no. He fully just made up assertions that I did not make. He did not engage you. It's quite telling that for all of his ranting about mission creep for FFRF, about how FFRF needs to stay out of gender politics and focus on areas of religion and, state church separation, which I'll get to the state church separation of it in a moment. But he does not he does not address my argument at all about the Christian colonialism of our understanding of gender hierarchies and gender binaries. He completely skips over that section, does not address it whatsoever. He starts talking about how I'm like denying that gametes exist, a word that exists nowhere. I don't think I have written the word gamete down since the last time I took a biology class in high school for simple need of it was a college credit class, so I then never needed to write down the word gamete in college. Like it was fully, again, when I talk about a straw man fallacy, he made up things to argue against to make me look unintelligent and to delegitimize my work. And then, as he's talking about mission creep and asking, I fail to see how all of this gender stuff and trans issues has anything to do with state church separation of the First Amendment, then he really steps out of his area of expertise and directly into mine. I am one of a small handful of attorneys that works directly at the intersection of state church separation and LGBT rights. I have been a vocal, proponent for the fact that these two are intrinsically tied. And I was saying this before Project 2025 became really a part of the public lexicon. But take one look at Project 2025. Take one look at the statements that Trump has been making recently. He was just recently gave a talk at Turning Point where he said that day one of his administration, he's going to end the gender lunacy in the United States, and it will be the policy of this country that there are two genders, male and female. You are seeing bills across the United States entitled Millstone Acts, which are a biblical reference. It is a reference to a verse that is, I'm paraphrasing here because my Bible's in the other room, but it's something along the lines of, and those who lead these little children away from me are better off being drowned in the sea with a millstone hung around their necks. Like, it is explicitly Christian nationalism. It is explicitly an issue of state church separation. It is explicitly an issue of theocracy. And even if it weren't explicit, it would still be implicit in the ways that we conceptualize gender in this country. So the fact that he's like, well, I don't understand why you're talking about this, and this is mission creep, and FFRF doesn't need to be doing this, is so completely ignorant of the point of all of my work, not just that one blog, but also the world and political situation that we live in.
Yeah, and FFRF for that matter. I mean, FFRF, for, I'm sure you know, but for viewers, it was founded because the leaders of American atheists at the time were expressing anti-Semitic tendencies. And the founders of FFRS said, no, that's not cool. We need to separate our activism from these regressive anti-humanist tendencies. I mean, in a way, FFRF is partly responsible for the rise of secular humanism and not just atheist advocacy.
Right. And it's also just so strange to me that this is a hill that, people like Coyne are ready and willing to die on, other than the fact that it's just pure transphobia. But it's the idea that they stood there and looked at all of the work that FFRF has done over the years. And suddenly it's like, oh, trans issues is where they draw the line. I don't see these guys saying anything about FFRF weighing in on abortion. And, something I'm working on right now is discussing how the political anti-trans movement and the anti-abortion, anti-reproductive rights movement, they're the same movement. It is based in the same theology. It is based in the same political ideology. They use the exact same playbooks. I mean, you look at what just happened with Defense Department funding and the ability to access gender-affirming care for the families of service members. That's the abortion playbook. That is the
Mhm.
abortion playbook right there. Banning access through government funded health insurance. That's it right there. New, more restrictive informed consent, waiting periods, more harsh penalties for doctors. That is all the abortion playbook. So it truly boggles the mind that something that is so readily apparent to most people in this space is apparently not there for the Coins and Dawkinses of the world.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. One of the questions that my co-hosts asked me to pass along was, do you think that the reaction either from FFRF or from the people who responded in the community would have been different if Coin had decided to make a race realism argument based on biology, perhaps?
Well, first of all, I don't think that, for better or worse, for my statement in terms of FFRF, I don't think that that ever would have been allowed to be published. I don't think that that would have ever been an argument that was permitted to be made. Uh, but I think the reaction in terms of both how FFRF reacted and how the public reacted in the wake of it, I think would have been the same. The majority of FFRF's membership is incredibly progressive, is, this atheist conservatism is not actually representative at all of FFRF's membership. I've met with many, many, many members during my time as a legal fellow and as an intern. I know the members. I've spoken with them plenty of times, and we have the data from the FFRF member surveys that back that statement up. I think that, there were mistakes made in the process of this piece getting published. Some I can say publicly, in that it has been said publicly that in attempting to prevent one controversy, all FFRF did was cause another. They were trying to prevent a censorship controversy, and it wound up backfiring spectacularly. And then there are other private things that I can't discuss that complicate the situation, I think, more than people would expect. And all I will say to that is that there is a reason I am staying and continuing to write for FFRF, and there is a reason that I have not completely packed my bags and left in the wake of all of this. I think
Okay.
in terms of the staff, in terms of the apology that happened in the wake of it, it was a decent apology. I think actions are going to speak a lot louder than words. I know a lot of the actions that are being taken, and what is being done to re-earn the trust that has been lost as a result of this. I think some of the apology was clumsy, particularly the phrasing of "we regret any distress." I truly think if the word "any" had been deleted, it would have had the intended effect without having the, "we're sorry you got mad" of it all.
Yeah, yeah,
The
slightly
staff,
patronizing. Yeah.
yes, and some of the discussions about disclaimers were not the best. To that, I will say it is the holidays. A lot of the communication staff was off, and there was a lot of crisis management happening very fast. And I think perhaps if this had not happened over the holidays, the response might have been a little bit different. But I think all in all, FFRF has had a commitment to LGBT people, to trans people. I have played a very large role in that. Like, I'm going to be full disclosure. I left FFRF at the end of August, and prior to that, I had spent 2 years only working on LGBT state church separation. I had an externally funded legal fellowship where my entire salary was specifically devoted to, we need one person to just work on this area. But I did, when I left, set it up in a very sustainable way so that the rest of the legal team can continue to sustain that work. And I think people are going to see moving forward that all of the good things you have seen from FFRF on this front, from public communications to amicus briefs to lawsuits, all of that is going to continue. And I think FFRF is very much putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah, in that apology, or regret, or however you want to phrase that, within 24 hours, Jerry Coyne's post was taken down and it was replaced by a promise to do better. But included in that was an announcement of a new legal arm. What is it? FFRF Action Fund.
Yeah, so the Action Fund has actually existed for quite a while now. It launched, God, when did it launch? It launched in 2023. So it's been around for a minute. It's run by the lovely Ryans. There are two amazing people named Ryan Jane and Ryan Dudley. They are the Ryans. We love them. So they are the 501c4. So FFRF itself is a 501c3, which is, a nonprofit can only engage in a small, limited amount of lobbying activities without risking nonprofit status. A 501c4, which is the Action Fund, can work on these lobbying activities. So it's the two Ryans, it's Mark Dan, who is our Capitol Hill lobbyist, and then Caitlin Berry, who is also wonderful. The legislative team, I've worked very closely with them because staff members, you have to be very careful about tracking your time, but staff members can work on both teams. I have worked closely with them on gender affirming care bans, on sports bans, lobbying, legislative testimony. I was very lucky to, through the course of that work, get invited to Wisconsin's veto ceremony on the sports ban here in Madison. So that was a very cool opportunity. So I think that was more that language of new legislative arm. That is just, Annie Laurie has been with FFRF since the beginning. So I think to her, and for those of us who have been, even in my brain, the Action Fund still feels new because I started as a legal intern in 2020. So in my head, it's like, oh, that's SRT. That's the strategic response team. And there are people on the legal team who even before then, conceptualized things before there was ever a strategic response team. So I think it still feels new for a lot of us because in the grand scheme of the organization, it's new, but it's been around for a while and has been doing a lot of really, really good work.
That's very, very good to hear. I know there's a lot of worry from people who aren't really paying close attention to what the organizations are up to, that they're just kind of there and like vaguely advocating in the direction of church-state separation.
Yeah.
But while on the other hand, you've got organizations like the ADF who are showing up at every freaking trial and every freaking state house hearing, bringing Chloe Cole and all the other grifters to come testify over and over again. Like they're always there and always visible.
Yes.
And we don't
ADF,
see
my perpetual enemy. Some of that is that on our side of things, we are out organized and we are outfunded. I think, unfortunately, this whole debacle can be used as an example of, we get caught up in a lot of fighting. I don't think this is an example of people on our side getting so caught up in fighting that we can't, all work together. I think that, Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and Pinker, they all needed to go. It was a long time coming. I feel okay saying that, A, on a moral standpoint, and B, because I'm no longer a full-time employee and nothing I say represents FFRF. I should be very, very clear about that. I am speaking in my capacity as an expert, not as someone necessarily speaking, I'm not speaking for FFRF here. But, these kind of arguments, because the other side is all bound together by who they hate and not who they care about, these arguments don't happen on the other side. And that's why groups like ADF can, go have these conferences where they're recruiting all of these attorneys and all of these quote unquote experts who By the way, when you go look at the legal decisions, a lot of their expert witnesses are deemed non-credible because they've never treated trans people before and are making theological arguments. This is a consistent problem on the left, even though FFRF is nonpartisan. Right now, things are very left and right, where we are just out organized and we're trying very hard. That was a big part of why the Action Fund was created, because there was a recognition that we needed more organizing in order to get people to go testify, in order to get people to speak with their legislators, compared to ADF, FFRF's legislative team is, I want to make sure I'm getting the counting right. I believe it's 4 people. I could be wrong on that. There could be someone I'm forgetting. I really hope not. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone, but I could be. But those are the people that like full-time work on legislation, compared to ADF, who has this massive team. But what I will say is that, FFRF, Americans United, American Humanist Association, all of these groups regularly do trainings to help regular everyday activists learn how to go talk to their lawmakers, learn how to provide testimony, learn how to, write and respond to regulatory issues. That's an area that kind of gets ignored in all of this, is the idea of regulations and how to submit a public comment. And that's something that all of these groups have done in the past. And I can guarantee you, if you reach out to their legislative team and you're like, I've got an organization and, we're like a local community group and we want to learn how to do this, they will jump at the opportunity to run a training, because we really do, across the board, everybody wants to get this moving. There are also secular lobby days that happen at Congress at least once a year, sometimes more, usually around the time of like See You at the Poll season and National Day of Prayer. There's also a secular lobby day that happens where people can volunteer to go talk to lawmakers about secular issues. So there is a very, very real work happening both on the legislative front and on the legal front. FFRF's legal team is roughly 12 people, give or take. And then in the summers, there's usually anywhere from 4 to 7 interns that also work. My intern class happened to be very small because I was a part of the COVID intern class, in which there were just 3 of us on our computers. I was the only out-of-state intern doing my best on a little like remote desktop, trying to do my internship while the world was collapsing around me. But it is a full professional team doing a lot of work. It is not just, there are some organizations where you're like, do you just send me a bumper sticker? Like, what's happening? Like, what does my donation do? And so I can speak for at least the big ones. So FFRF, Americans United, American Humanist Association, American Atheists, Baptist Joint Committee, and I'll throw Catholics for Choice in there as well. They all have professional teams that work very, very hard and are doing really substantive boots on the ground type of work.
That's good to hear. Is it in these days? It can feel very, very lopsided in the political discourse. So overall, to get us back on the topic here, it has been a controversial time. It has been a firestorm of reactions in the community, both for and against. And FFRF had to come out and publicly state they do support civil rights for everybody. Do you think this is overall a net good that this happened?
Yes, I think it is launching conversations that have needed to happen. And that's the thing is, if it wasn't this blog, it would have been something else. This was a powder keg getting ready to explode. This was something that, there's a lot of talk right now about schism in the atheist community, and weirdly, some people have blamed me for that, which is hilarious on a lot of levels. But because I'm literally just a guy, like I'm just kind of here Like, I wrote this blog over a month ago, and then it just all imploded over Christmas. But I think it is a lot of people who maybe don't, hear the name Coin, hear the name Dawkins, and they know them from a book they read 10 years ago, and they think, yes, this is a face of atheism, and like would recommend them, not knowing the things that they post on their blogs or have recently done in interviews. uh you know People are seeing the mask being taken off. And so I think that has been really good and really important. I think that there are a lot of discussions being had right now about what is and is not acceptable, what the boundaries are, you know, what is the difference between debate and bigotry, and what is and is not, and what should and should not be a debate. And I think that these are things that in the state church world we have needed to discuss for a long time. And maybe this is because I'm younger and, I'm early in my professional career, but it does feel like there's a turning point happening here where, yeah, maybe there is a quote unquote schism, but I do think that this was ultimately a good thing, in that, you know, the level of influence that is going to be wielded by some of these people is going to be greatly diminished. And I think it's going to have some negative effects. I think there are some people that are going to be led even further down an alt-right pipeline, which is really unfortunate. I do think I would be shocked if we didn't see these three particular men go on their kind of weird white guy canceled tour, which will probably influence some people, unfortunately. But I do think, generally speaking, they have lost a lot of institutional credibility. I think a lot of organizations are going to be very hesitant to align themselves with all of these very dangerous viewpoints. And I don't use the term dangerous viewpoint lightly. Uh, the rhetoric that was used in Coin's blog has been and will continue to be used to violently harm trans women. And I think that we cannot ignore that. So I think, yeah, generally, a lot has been brought to light because of this. And I think that that's the biggest net good. And then the fact that they're gone. They are no longer affiliated with FFRF. They have been slowly leaking off of honorary boards and that type of thing over the past decade or so, as their more unfortunate viewpoints have become public knowledge. And I think this is just a bit of a floodgate opening. So I
Yeah,
hate how it happened, but if I have to find a silver lining, I will always find a silver lining.
I completely agree. We have to try to stay optimistic because I mean, we still have to live here, you know?
Yep.
We have to do what we can. Okay, I've got one more for you. Um,
Perfect.
try to close out on a hopefully lighter note. Jerry Coyne closed his essay by asserting, I am about as far as one can get from being a Christian nationalist. Why do you imagine he felt he needed to say that?
Well, because in my blog, I say that, transphobia and the transphobic project right now is a hallmark piece of Christian nationalism that, and it's also a key part of fascism. And, I go into the fact that there are a lot of atheists that are transphobic specifically because they have not deconstructed their problematic views surrounding gender and sex and sexuality that they still hold on to from their previous days as being religious. I see this especially with ex evangelicals, that there are a lot of people who stop believing in God and then go no further. And they still proselytize, they still try to convert people, and they still hold a lot of their problematic social theology to give it a term. And so I think that was part of it, is he was responding in language that I used. But I think it's also because we are seeing continuing data that shows that you can be a Christian nationalist without being a Christian. Those
Mm-hmm.
two things are not mutually exclusive. Perry and Whitehead's work has gone into that. That's been kind of those two have really done a lot of the bulk of the work in terms of what now is publicly understood as Christian nationalism, where there are Christian nationalist atheists who, you know,
There's a whole organization of them.
yes, who I'm sure, Coin is probably already in conversations with. But
Doubtless. I've heard that they're well, technically he's not their leader. He's a former atheist leader who's now like a number two advisor guy to their nominal leader. But
yes,
he's already been making public overtures that, oh, the this brand of science is welcome in our camp, where
yeah,
we set up shop at Turning Point USA and sell Trump merch, that sort of
yes.
thing. Yeah.
So, I think that that's a big part of it. I think he made this weird claim saying that he's not, it was weird. He conceded the point that sex and gender are different. That was the other weird thing. He conceded the point that sex and gender are different. And then he goes, I'm not transphobic and think that trans people should have rights. Just also, I think that they're sexual predators that don't believe in science.
And
Like he
shouldn't have any of
clearly,
the
he
rights.
clearly knows he's wrong. I think that's his entire concluding statement. He clearly knows that he's wrong. I don't think that he engaged, and I say this in my Substack response to all of this, that he was engaging in the argument in good faith. If there's an argument to be had, I don't think that he was approaching it with any intellectual integrity. And I think he was trying to save himself there at the end of being like, but let people do whatever they want. And it's like, no, that's not what you said, Jerry. That is in fact the opposite of what you said. You can't just add a concluding statement at the end and be like, but I'm not transphobic. It's like, that's not how it works. Like, talk about denying objective reality.
For real. Yeah, his whole paper, it seems to have the tone of, I can just assert a thing. Screw this whole career of demonstrating things by observation and experimentation and repeatable results. I'm just going to assert stuff now.
Yeah.
It's wild. Oh, well, enough of Jerry for today. Kat Grant, thank you so much for joining us and
Thank
sharing
you
your
for having
thoughts.
me.
Where can people find you if out on the wild interwebs?
Yeah, so if people want to find more of my writing, I just launched a blog on Substack called Transing Boundaries, where I write about religion. I'm going to be writing about Catholicism, theology, law, public policy, kind of anything right now, because I apparently was not, I didn't get enough of internet wrath from pissing off the atheist bros. I am currently working on a piece about the connections between tech bros and theo bros. So that will be coming out soon. You can find me at Blue Sky at Kat Dean, KatDene, or on TikTok at Chuckle Lemon. That's Chuckle Lemon, no spaces in between, but there are lots of L's and E's in there. So good luck for at least as long as TikTok still exists.